Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of Carolyn Talks. And today I am joined by writer and director Travis Taute and actor Jarrid Geduld about their new film, South African film, Indemnity. It's an action drama about a fireman who finds himself in an extremely dangerous situation because, you can't trust people with money. And that's kind of how I'm going to boil it down.
So funny.
But before we get into the film, I'm going to ask Travis and Jared to say a little bit about themselves. And so, Travis, I'll begin with you.
Cool. Hi, everybody. My name is Travis Taute. I'm a writer and director based in Cape Town, South Africa. I have a production company here called Gambit Films, and we produce film and television. And my first feature film, Indemnity, just premiered at Fantasia at the 25th edition, had its world premiere there. And yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
And Jared?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm Jarrid Geduld. I'm a South African-born actor. I'm 31 years old, and I've had the absolute blessing of being able to act for the last 18, 19 years as a South African actor. And it's just been an absolute blessing and a wonderful journey being a South African actor, and to be part of a film such as Indemnity with Travis at the helm of it. And so, yeah, that's just a little bit about me.
Great. So my first question is: this is they're saying it's one of the, I guess you could say, biggest promoted South African action films, and I think it's really interesting how the film kind of like has a little bit of South African politics, I would say, interwoven in it. So I want to talk about a bit about that actually, because I think because a lot of the film actually hinges on this one small aspect of the film. So Travis, could you talk a bit about that aspect of the film first?
Sure. Are you talking about the issues that Jarrid's character Theo is dealing with, or the greater the politics in play in the film?
I guess you could say starting with the macro first, the greater politics of the film, because it's about this one character who's basically considering himself to be saving South Africa from colonialism, which I was like, oh, a white man, you saying this, the irony. And but then it's the macro, but then it all kind of like boils down to Theo, which is Jared's character, and he's kind of just like what you would say a cog in the wheel, but then he's the cog that gets thrown in, and he's the wrench that gets thrown into this wheel. And so I just want to talk a bit about the bigger aspect, so we can just go down to the minute aspect of it first. First.
For sure. So look, the impetus for this film was really, I think, a couple of years ago while I was doing research, I'd read this interesting article about soldiers that were returning from the war in Afghanistan. This is like a good decade ago. And how they were struggling to adapt, or rather readapt to life, post having experienced a serious amount of trauma. And how there was this massive sort of lack of support system and facilities in order for them to be able to deal with this, with the trauma that they had experienced. And then it kind of, I went down a rabbit hole. I started doing research, closer to home, and I started looking into first responders and firefighters in particular. And I read all these like just really interesting, scary, and traumatic stories about these first responders who had experienced so much trauma in their lives, but really there was no avenue for them to be able to express it or deal with it on a really sort of functioning emotional or psychological level. And so the idea was really sort of born out of that. And then like looking at my own personal experience in my life and thinking about how there's this real stigma attached to mental health. And it's particularly for men, an old generation of men, and then more specifically like men of color. And I found it so interesting that there was a serious inability to talk about or ask for help in dealing with any kind of trauma. And that to me was really something fascinating to explore, considering that it was so untalked about in many of our communities. And then setting it within an environment, the film in an environment as masculine as a firefighting department. I just thought it would be just an interesting world to explore that I hadn't really seen before or dealt with in this kind of way. And then I went a step further and I was like, what if someone weaponized this? And that really is where the larger politics at play come into in this film. It's funny that you say that it's ironic that it was a white man, you know, essentially, yeah, trying to colonize the whole continent. Is that because that's his grand ambition? And I just thought it was interesting because, you know, in South Africa we've got such an interesting long history with regards to colonialism, and yet we're such an incredibly diverse country. You know, we've got 11 different languages, we've got a multitude of cultures and traditions, and I thought, you know, how could we sort of subvert the expectation of what people would expect to see from a person in power in this man's position today? And that really was sort of a conscious choice to cast a white actor, as opposed to, you know, something that I think people would go, are you trying to comment on political times currently? And I didn't want it to be that conversation. I wanted it to be this immersive experience that you're watching a genre film that happens to be dealing with topical issues, as opposed to that being the point of conversation. And then also the character itself. There's this really interesting character in that worked for the old government in the apartheid regime, called Wouter Bosson. He was this like military general, and he had a nickname. It was nicknamed Dr. Death, because of all this like insane experience, like experiments that he was conducting on people for this pursuit of science or, you know, military advancement. And so it was really a multitude of things that sort of came together to form the basis of this character.
Yeah, because it's interesting, because when it comes to, I find, especially with films like this, it's always interesting where writers like yourself are able to like integrate the science and like psychology with the, I guess you could say, the mechanization of the military and geopolitics and that kind of stuff. And it's always interesting how that kind of does, like, you, like for the film, like with Theo, you bring it down to the as micro, where it's like you focus it on one person, and then when you have a character like Theo, you're able to like say, okay, you're doing this to one person, like what's the consequences of doing this to hundreds of men? And when, especially when predominantly these men are, as you said, you wanted to make it about men of color, and then they're working in jobs that you don't really think of, because he's not a military man, he's a fireman, right? So I think it's kind of interesting that you kind of like put him in a position in a job where we don't typically get to see these kind of films being made. And going from that, for you, Jarrid, tell me a bit about playing Theo, this character who finds out he's been dealing with PTSD, he's been dealing with extreme trauma from an event where he lost his co-workers, but then he's now on the run. He's dealing with the death of his wife. He's dealing with the fact that he's scared of losing his son. And then he's finding all step by step all of these things that he's just a part of a plan that he had no idea even existed. So can you just tell me a bit about reading the script and like finding parts of the character to relate to, and then building out the character during like production, especially for your stunt training? Because I think for you, I read that you trained for 3 months for this, and then during the process. So I've always find interesting with actors how your persona with the characters change as you train more and more, because you're becoming more confident in your in the skills that you're learning.
Yeah, I think it's actually quite weird, because the initial first time that I got, you know, a glimpse of or heard of this film Indemnity being made, I think when my agent reached out to me and she said, "Hey man, there's this audition, and you know, they wanna see you for this role," and they sent me the whole script, and I read the whole script within, I think, the first hour of getting it. And to be honest, I think a lot of people don't know this, but I said to my partner the moment I was done reading the script, I said, "Man, this is a badass film. This script is insane. You know, I think it's epic. I think it's fantastic." And I mean, I know Gambit Films, and I know Travis, and I know, you know, I have a little bit of a history with a lot of the people that work for Gambit Films. And I thought, oh man, it's fantastic for them. And I turned to my girlfriend and I said to her, you know, but I don't think it's me. I don't think I'm the right one to do it, you know. Not because I didn't think I was capable of doing it. I just think that, you know, initially when I read the script, I felt Theo, the character itself, had a bit of a presence. There was this, you know, towering presence that I genuinely and honestly felt was needed for the character, and especially in the actor. And what I mean by that is someone that was a lot taller than me and a lot more masculine than me and a lot more stronger than me. And I generally and wholeheartedly believed that. And I was quite reluctant to go and do a read for the role. But I did, I said, ah, man, and there's a lot of other actors that I thought were very, very good peers and colleagues of mine who I thought were also perfect for the role. But I went, and I thought initially after the first edition, I thought, man, that was lovely. I went in guns blazing, came back, went on and, worked on some other projects and pursued some other stuff of mine, and I still felt the same way. And I thought, man, you know what? I don't think I'm gonna, even, but then the film went away. It went away for a couple of months and it came back after like 6 or 7 months. And I was like, damn, they want to see me again, and I've been through it's been 17, 18 years of doing this thing. I know how this thing works, so I thought, I said, I really genuinely felt that I shouldn't go. I said, I don't want to go, because not because I didn't believe in myself and I didn't think I had the physical attributes or the acting abilities to pull off this thing. I come from a long body of work where I do a lot of dramatic stuff, and I've really kind of built a solid body of work based off of some serious characters that I've played. And I've played a lot of real life characters, people who have lived strong, big lives in South Africa. And I've been given the opportunity several times to portray these real life characters. So I was never doubting myself, but I genuinely thought it wasn't me. And then it came again, and I went, and I thought I'd go, I'd do the same thing. And that went back and forth, I think, once or twice after the initial first edition. But by the second edition, I went, hold on. Actually, I'm the man to do it. I then connected, because then I started reading the script. I think I read it another 2 times after the initial first time. But then I started seeing little things about the script, man. I really started connecting with the character because I started reading it a bit more in depth with a different eye. And, some time had passed, and I thought, man, what a beautiful character to portray. And then I started resonating with the element of trauma and PTSD. And that's what really kind of intrigued me about the story, was PTSD, because I never for the first time had to kind of sit and think about it. We know PTSD exists on such a big scale, universally, in so many different facets, whether you're a firefighter, police officer, or just your normal Joe, being a sweeper or a janitor at a school or whatever. I think PTSD and trauma does exist, and I think that's what intrigued me. And then I started looking up on PTSD, and I think my human connection to the trauma is what really genuinely made me kind of change my tune about playing the part or not playing the part. And it's only once I started looking up on PTSD and seeing such a tremendous, such an untouched kind of aspect of film and television, especially locally for South Africa. I mean, we've seen films where PTSD is explored or some sort of trauma is explored, but I thought once I started seeing this pain and this trauma and this there's very little information and kind of not much information, especially from a local perspective. That's what made me go, hey man, I think I want to do it. And then I started really hard kind of lobbying to want to play the part, because I felt a very, very deep desire to want to be a part of something that first of all kind of put something like PTSD and trauma on such a big scale, and kind of forces people. When you do film, you force people to to sit for 2 hours and watch something, and that's something that I wanted to be a part of, and that's initially what got me to change my tune. And then when initially I got the part, I thought, hey man, Travis called me one day. I was sitting at work, I was on another project, and he called me one morning and he said, hey, do you want to make a film? And I went, hey, of course, man. I said, I'm on board. But I genuinely, I said to him, I think I said to him on that day, if I'm going to do this film, my biggest thing was that I wanted to do everything myself. And one of the hidden talents and physical attributes of me is that nobody really knows that I come from a very strong physical background, whether it be gymnastics, sports, or any kind of physical thing. I really have a genuine connection with my physical abilities, and that's been something that has been with me for all my life. I think the first time I shot a backflip, was when I was 4 years old, and people didn't really, I think I shook my whole family up when I when I did the backflip. And I think that was one thing that I also kind of wanted to explore. I said, if I'm going to do the film, I would really like to explore and do everything I possibly could physically, especially from a physical and a stunt perspective of the film. I wanted to do it all myself, and I didn't know. I don't really know if they were keen in the beginning, but I think after the conversation I had with Travis, I think, and especially with some other people from Gambit Films, eventually coming on board with that idea. And also we have, having the stunt team who was helmed by Stunts SA, Vernon Willems and Grant Powell, whom I also have a long history in terms of the film industry. So they also kind of have a very good understanding of my physical abilities. And so I think coupled with the conversation I had with Travis, and then also the knowledge that the stunt team has had of me since, because they've seen me grow up in the industry, and so they also know the physical abilities I've kind of shown throughout my career. And so coupled with their knowledge of, what I can and can't do, I think it was just it was just a match made in heaven for them as well, to know that they have someone that is physically possible of doing the things, but we would still have to kind of put him through that training process in order for us to go, okay, we think you are more than capable now. And I think once the training process, I think the initial, I think the first thing that we did was kind of putting me in touch with the stunt team so that they can kind of assess and see what was possible with me in terms of the physical abilities and all the stunts, because there were some really dangerous stuff that we did there, some things that there was, I think, out of the entire shoot, there was one thing that made me go, oh man, I think I'm way over my head here. But I think the more you train and the more you believe in your physical abilities, and you have such a strong team of stunt people who are just absolutely phenomenal in what they do, especially on a local front, but also on an international scale. So they really do have everything in place, knowing that they're there, knowing that they trust me, and everything was kind of there was a good eye on everything. I think the first thing we decided was to kind of get that process out of the way. And initially, I think I think within a week of the conversation I had with Travis, I was in full-blown training. And I think they had a very good setup of what that was going to be. There was physical, there was cardio, there was jiu-jitsu, there was martial arts, there was stunt training, there was rigging, there was that. So they had a full kind of system in which they were going to kind of train me right up until the day one of filming. So by the time we reached day one of filming, I would have gone through everything we would possibly do for the whole film. And so I wasn't surprised or by anything that we were doing throughout the shoot in terms of the stunts and the physical, the fight choreography. So they had, I think the production coupled with the stunt team had a very, very, they ran a tight ship in terms of how the training aspect of Theo and me as an actor was going to kind of be explored until, we started filming. And that made it a lot easier, I think, that we were all kind of on the same page every single, day of training, and then also leading up to the filming of Indemnity. But then I think when it comes to, playing the character itself, Theo, it was quite difficult. When you're playing characters, you never really, I don't think you really, I have a good understanding of the stuff that I do as an actor, and one can only hope that your interpretation of something is what other people kind of can connect to. And I think that's always the difficult thing when you're playing a character, whether it be a comedic character or someone that has, just going through a lot of emotions. But especially it's a lot more difficult when you're touching on such deep topics like PTSD. I thought initially, hey man, I don't even suffer from PTSD, so I need to do research. But even once you start doing the research, you start to question yourself, and I think when I started doing the research about PTSD, I started, reflecting about my life and kind of tuning into, stuff that happened to me growing up, and, growing up as a colored man in communities like, we have here in Cape Town, in the ghettos. I think for the first time I realized that, hey man, I think we all suffering from some sort of trauma, some, whether it might not be physical trauma, but there's some sort of trauma, and that trauma is so deep rooted. And it comes from so many aspects of your life. And I think that's when I that's the one thing that connected me was, although I never suffered from PTSD in terms of Theo, the character's aspect, in terms of him being a firefighter and losing all his friends, and going through all these hectic things in his life. I think the one thing that resonated with me, and what really kind of helped me connect with Theo ultimately, was I was forced to kind of also look into myself and reflect about my life. I come from I've also had a lot of things that I've done in my life that may have caused me some sort of trauma or some sort of PTSD. It might not be PTSD as a whole, but and I think that's what made playing Theo such a special thing for me. And again, I think to answer your question about playing the character, I think it's difficult to say, when you're playing a character suffering from PTSD and you're having to, carry your film for so long, and you have to keep track of so many things when you're in the moment of things, because your continuity in terms of performance and emotion has to be portrayed. And that's a difficult thing, because you have to keep track of all those things. But one can only hope at the end of the day that when the film is done, I think that for me personally, because I'm such a, I really genuinely believe in my abilities as an actor, that at the end of the day, ultimately, I hope that my interpretation of who Theo is and his emotional journey and his struggle with trauma, specifically PTSD, and in being a father and a single dad at that eventually, is something that people can, at the very least, go, we understand and we can connect. I don't think that my interpretation is by far the best or is right, but I think as an actor who's taken the time to really understand some sort of understanding with the character, I just hope that people kind of ultimately can connect at some sort of level and say, hey man, well done, for playing that role and for portraying the character, and we understand it, even though people might not also be going through some sort of PTSD or trauma. I just ultimately hope that the interpretation is what can be looked at and go, we think it's I. Yeah.
Now I say it's I. So, Travis, my next question actually kind of segues from what Jarrid is saying. So the end of the film, I think, is very interesting because he does go through this extremely traumatic journey. Like, the thing is with this character is he starts out in a traumatic place. And at the end, you don't get a full resolution, because when you're talking about things like trauma and then dealing with grief from everything and everyone that he's lost, and all of these people chasing him, going through all of these extremely physically difficult situations. At the end, I thought it was really, I think, interesting, and I think also a very important thing to show him back at therapy, because my first thought was it's amazing that he's able to put himself in a mentally and emotionally vulnerable state again. Spoilers, where he's surrounded by strangers and he's talking to a therapist, because I was like, if I was him, I would be kind of hesitant about trusting another therapist, because it's he was betrayed, I think, in one of the worst ways possible. And but because he's doing it for himself and for his own mental health and for his son, he's willing to put himself back into that position. So could you just talk a bit about resolving the film that way? Because I think despite all of the amazing action sequences, I think that part of the film is the one that really sticks out with me, because it shows how important it is that people, when we go through trauma, that we work to not resolve, but we work our way through the trauma, to make ourselves healthier.
Yeah. So I mean, as much as the film has all these different set pieces and spectacle in the sense of the action, for me it was really important to ground this film in one person's emotional journey, and where Theo starts in the beginning of the film and everything that happens in between. It came down to this fundamental shift, in that here is a man, and that he embodies so many people's perspectives in terms of, the attitude towards mental health, in his unwillingness to move or accept he has a problem or ask for help or just shift the needle, however slightly, and as a minor step towards getting better. And despite the betrayal, despite everything that he goes through in this film, I think when people accept that and make that choice, it's a brave thing to do. And it takes a certain amount of courage to go, flip, I'm not okay, I need some help. And for me, that was his ultimate growth. That little shift towards the end of the film where he's actually having accepted all the experiences that occurred in this film, and probably before and as well in his life, it really was about, okay, here I am, but I need to move forward, and how do I do that? And he made that choice, and that choice for me is ultimately what his redemption is. And I really thought it was important to leave the audience with that sense of hope, that despite the shit that he goes through, there is light at the end of the tunnel. However long or hard that journey may be, ultimately, already for him, he's begun the cathartic journey of healing himself.
Right. And something that occurred to me while I was watching the film was I noticed that we don't see him actually kill anyone on screen. And I thought it was actually a really interesting perspective, because to be honest, when we watch these kind of action films, we do get to see the hero, the protagonist, even though they're going through extreme mental trauma, like we see them become killers, where it's like they're forced to become killers because of the circumstances. But I think Theo is kind of different because we never actually see him become a killer on screen, where it's like the fact, like, because no matter what they do, that's still who he is fundamentally. And the one time, unfortunately, something like that happens, it was not because of his own actions, and it wasn't because he decided that this isn't something that I have to do. Everything else apart from that, he made a conscious effort. I'm not going to kill people. I'm going to beat you. I'm going to pound you into the ground.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to kill you. So could you just tell me a bit about that decision, that decision from a narrative perspective? And also, I think from fight choreography, because I think you would have had to determine when you're writing the script, like for the set pieces, you're going to have to determine, okay, if he's performing this particular action, this is how I'm going to resolve this fight without him actually having to take like a kill shot.
Yeah, I thought it was a conscious decision. So it was very important for me that with Theo and this crazy amount of trauma that he goes through in this film, and the amount of people that attack him, and the amount of times he has to defend himself physically, that stepping over that line, committing an act out of vengeance or for whatever motivated reason, which occurs in, we've seen that in that story a multitude of times. I always feel, and it's a very personal thing, that there's something that sort of you lose in terms of being able to redeem yourself. You know what I mean? It's a line that gets crossed. And no matter what you do, if you cross that line, it is almost virtually impossible for you to come back from that. And it's a simple perspective from this character, in that every fight or every act of violence that is committed on his behalf is either in self-defense, or there's an element of greater good. So I need to do something bad in order to achieve something for someone else's mercy, for the mercy of someone else, or to achieve something that is bigger than myself. And for me, it's that core quality is something heroic. It's something that is embodied in many first responders, and something that just felt so true to the character. And for me, he is not a killer, and he never was a killer. He's just a man who a lot of bad things have happened to, and who people have taken advantage of seeing that difficulty that he's struggling with, and then used it as a weapon.
So Theo, sorry, Jarrid. So Jarrid, could you talk a bit about actually filming these scenes as the actor? Because one thing that, like, with regards to the fight scenes, I noticed that he didn't kill anyone, but also I noticed with your acting, like, a lot of it is like, I think it's a really brilliant movement with the sound design, where we can hear him breathing very heavily and he sounds exhausted. And again, I think what also sets us apart from a lot of films in this genre is like Theo is not a methodical killer, and I think a lot of that is brought through in your performance, where he's exhausted and he's breathing heavy, and like he's able to defend himself and he's able to fight, but he's still in this place where he's still mentally, I wouldn't say unstable, but he's confused because he's trying to figure out what move he has to make next while he's still in a moment of chaos. So could you just tell me a bit about the performance of the action scenes, because I think a lot of his emotional, I don't want to say growth, but a lot of the emotions that we don't hear him talk about actually comes through in the fighting. So, and I thought it was really impressive with your performance.
Thank you. I think the fight sequences. Well, initially, I before I started filming, I started playing around with certain things. You know, I started because when you read the script, when I read the script, I saw all there's so many moments in the script where it's just extremely exhausted, and physically, I think physically when I read it, I could physically see the things that was gonna, happen. And then when we started training and we started, putting together the fight choreography, and we were kind of getting into like the bigger sequences, the sequences that were quite lengthy, and it became quite exhausting. So I started, once I kind of connected, once I read the story and I started doing the fight choreography training, I thought, I didn't really get exhausted. I couldn't get tired. And I found that to be quite problematic for me from an acting perspective, especially because I had so much cardio and so much endurance. I couldn't get tired. I could go the whole time, but I felt for Theo, definitely, I think there was an element of like exhaustion and like just trying to survive the whole time. There was the survival aspect within all this heavy fight choreography that needed to be there. And so I started playing around I started developing this thing where I was playing around with my breathing. And I've never done it before. I don't even know where it came from. I just started sitting one day and started playing with my oxygen a little bit, just trying to play around and see what it does. And I found that the more I used my breathing to the point where it almost slows the heart rate down completely, that it brought something quite interesting to the way, even the way I opened my eyes, or the way my body moved, or the way, I breathe. And I found that to be very special. And I thought when we eventually started doing the fight sequences in filming, that was the one thing that I wanted to incorporate was that element of exhaustion and just you see this character Theo, and I think all the things, there was always this disruptive thing that causes disruption, and then you find him catching his breath for like a little bit, and then you think he can go and figure this out and sit for for a little while and try and process this thing, but then the next moment something else happens and he's back into this this loop. It's like a little cycle that just continuously happens, and I found that continuously just happened. I think, sorry, what was your question? I can't remember what your question was.
No, it's okay. So going from that, as I thought it was very interesting how in your fight scenes, we get to learn more, I think, about Theo in these moments of violence than I think in a lot of the quieter moments, because I think that's where we got to see a lot of his frustration and the anger and the fear, because he's afraid of a lot of things. And I thought it was interesting to get those in fight scenes more than with regards to what you would call typical dramatic moments.
Yeah, no, just to get back to that question you asked, I think, initially when I also found it quite strange that Theo wasn't killing anybody. And I think Travis did mention to me one day, he said to me, Theo's not a killer. And I was like, what? But he's doing all these crazy fight sequences, and I think when it does happen, it's kind of it's accidental, it's as a result of defending himself and as a result of trying to adapt in a situation of complete chaos and violence where someone loses their life. And so I think that for me is not, I think that also kind of explain it doesn't kind of put the finger on Theo to say that, yo, Theo's a killer. I think you really kind of you feel for the character in terms of like, oh man, yo, he was actually just trying to defend himself, or it was as a result of something that caused a different kind of events and somebody lost their life. So you don't really ever get to see the fact that, yo, this guy's just a cold-blooded killer. And I think that was something that was the integrity that Travis really wanted to kind of uphold with the character. And also, he said to me one day, Theo's not a swearer, he doesn't swear. And I found that so difficult not to swear. But I respected it because, I didn't, some of the things I didn't see, some of Travis is there, and Travis is like, he has this big eye, and I also have to trust, his eye from such a, bird's eye view. But obviously as an actor you go, but dude, this is in a moment you want to swear here, you know what I mean? But when I think back at it, I think all the things that Travis has decided, the things that he's made in terms of like, Theo's not a killer, Theo doesn't swear, and Travis has such a gentle way of kind of doing things and explaining things to you that you kind of go, you get it. And I actually didn't get it, but I get it now, now that the film's done, and you sit back and you kind of reflect on the film and the trajectory of, the story, and who this character really is. You really kind of, you go back and you go, oh man, this man has such a there's such a lot of respect for him in terms of like what he's chosen to do with such a character, because we could easily have gone the other way, where we see, on your big action films, where all these, John Wicks and Jason Bourne, them, they, again, they also, you don't really kind of, you don't care if they're killing people because you're watching it for the action, but for him to be aware of that element, it just says a lot about the integrity he's trying to uphold with the character and also the film as a whole. And I think that ought to be respected as well,
No, I completely agree, and I'm a huge fan of like the John Wick films. I'm here for all the action, and we all relate to, like I just said, like we all really don't care that he's killing these people, because we're like, you know what, y'all kind of deserve it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Exactly, but the difference with this and these people the people that Theo is fighting, they do deserve whatever's coming to them. But again, I think it's important that we do see that he doesn't kill, because he's not a John Wick. He's just a fireman. He's not a trained mercenary, and I think it's important that we do get that distinction and that differentiation between Theo and a lot of other characters in this genre.
Yeah, and I think it's important, like, just if I could add on, is that I think Theo is definitely capable. I think he has the physical ability to do it, and I think he makes the conscious choice always to take a step back. And I think that was something important for me, because he's more than capable of doing it and going there. But as soon as you do, it just becomes a different character and a different story.
Exactly, yeah. I agree completely, and I think that's what makes him so important. And it kind of like, and I think that's a character that we should see more often in action films. But again, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me, and congrats on the film. I really, really enjoyed it.
So much.
More time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much. Bye. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Cheers.
Bye-bye.